All right, I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation with Joe Gerstein of Smart Recovery. We're going to really get into what Smart Recovery is, what it stands for, what the program's like, what you can experience by checking out a meeting, and where you can find it, including how you can attend online. So we're going to dive really deep into Smart Recovery as well as Joe's story and how he got into this and how he came upon it. So stick around, you're going to love it. Here, we want to show you what's possible in the world of sobriety. We introduce you to the various tools, programs, and resources available because there are way more options than you may even realize. We want you to find the one that works for you.
And we do it through people who share their pathway to recovery and will help you find your path to freedom. Because getting sober can feel hard enough. You don't have to do it alone. I'm Sarah Roberts.
And I'm Roger Deveau, and this is Sobriety Starts Here. Thank you, Joe, for being here with me again to talk about Smart Recovery as a great option for people who are looking to get into sobriety, get sober, or maybe who are just struggling and really need a support system. So if you wouldn't mind, can you take us through, first of all, what is Smart Recovery?
So Smart Recovery is an acronym. It stands for Self-Management Addiction Recovery Training. And it's a nonprofit organization. I'd say 98% of the people who are involved with this organization are volunteers. Wow. With a very small staff. It started off in the United States in Sacramento, California, about 28 years ago. And when I joined and started up a group in Boston, there were 12 other groups, and now there's 2,700 groups in 24 countries on 6 continents. So obviously, it's had an astronomical acceptance. Now, it's a science-based program. And now we can say, I think there's been enough studies done that it's an evidence-based program. Almost any type of program can help people get over an addiction, but certain people are going to adhere more closely and more easily to certain types of programs. So our program is a self-empowerment program. We say, it's up to you. We'll help you. And how I describe it is a program that helps you clarify your thinking so you can make better decisions for yourself. Obviously, anybody with an addiction has been making bad decisions, a lot of bad decisions, and they're continuing to make bad decisions. It's very difficult to go to your first recovery meeting, group recovery meeting, even though it's anonymous and confidential. So by the time people walk through the door, they have been making a lot of what they recognize as bad decisions. Some people, of course, are coerced to go to meetings, and they may not accept the fact that they have a serious, perhaps life-threatening problem. And but the great majority of people who are attending our meetings are self-motivated to come at least and see what it's all about. Some of them may have been to 12-step meetings, which are ubiquitous, and just don't like it, or don't like the atmosphere, or don't like the religiosity or the autocracy where they tell you what you have to do and so forth. And that's a human right. You don't have to agree with everyone and everyone's style and everyone's orientation. So we offer, along with some other non-12-step groups, we offer a different approach, that's all. And it's an approach that's based on science. It's based fundamentally on 2 precepts. One is cognitive behavioral psychology, which is certainly the best studied and best documented approach to helping people change how they think. I used to say there were thousands of studies, but I read recently there have been 50,000 studies in cognitive behavioral psychology. And It's demonstrated efficacious for addictions, for anxiety disorders, including panic disorder, for depression, including major depression, for insomnia, for chronic pain, and now even for schizophrenia. So it's a very effective treatment. It's not for everybody. Some people don't get it. We understand that. We are free. Programs are free. Some practitioners may use our program in their private practice. That's okay. Yep. But the group meetings are intended to be free and are free. We pass the hat like they do at the 12-step meetings, yep. But there's no obligation to put anything in. So that's basically the outline. It's a 4-point program. And if you like, I'll go through the points.
Would love to hear what the points are.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, really quickly, who is it for? Is it anyone struggling with any kind of addiction, or do you focus solely on more alcohol, or what do you like to focus on?
Well, depending on the demographics of the area where you are, you may find different categories of people with addictions, but we don't make a distinction. I like to say we use the Gerstein approach to addictions. An addiction is an addiction is an addiction. So whether it's gambling, alcohol, various kinds of drugs, the internet, whatever, the fundamental brain mechanisms that govern the takeover of your brain sort of by this compulsion to continue doing this and obsession with it is the same. I mean, I've seen gambling addictions that seem to be as severe and compulsive as any cocaine addiction. And so we don't make a distinction for that reason. Now, it might be in certain areas where 90% of the people have an alcohol problem. I've done about 800 prison meetings. There, I'd say it's about 50-50. Maybe there's 10-15% of the people have dual addictions to alcohol and drugs. Mm-hmm. Some have addictions to criminal thinking, criminal activity. They like the high and the buzz of the risk. So it's a very broad spectrum of addictions.
Which I love. I love that you're not excluding anybody. You're here to help, and it doesn't matter what you're suffering from. Come on in. Our arms are open, and we're here to help you.
Yes, and it seems to work out well, and the insights from different perspectives of people with different addictions make for an interesting meeting. The 4-point program was evolved over time. Because we're a science-based program, we evolve over time. As science evolves, we evolve the program. Now, that was also true in the early days of AA when they were developing the program. It took them about 10 years before they got to a point where they hardened the program, put it in the big book. So we're not at that stage, and probably will never be at that stage because we keep changing. So it began as a 2-point program, and then we pretty quickly recognized that we were missing a few important points, so we added them. And point number 1 is enhancing the motivation to change. So this is without question the most important point. How do we know that? Well, many people get over serious addictions on their own. And you might say, well, why do you tell people that? You want them to come to the meetings. Yeah, well, it's so important for them to understand that they have the power. Human beings obviously have the capacity to develop addictions, and they do have within them the capacity to overcome them. The studies on this are unequivocal. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of people in different categories and so forth get over addictions on their own. And that's a very fundamental fact.
Yeah. Well, and it's extremely powerful, because I feel like a lot of messaging in the sobriety world is kind of counter to that. And I feel like that messaging alone might be damaging to some people, where just the belief that there's hope and that they can overcome it might be enough to set them on the right path. And hearing that you're stuck in something forever and it'll never change might give them the feeling of, well, why even try?
Yes, it's very discouraging. And the truth is, you can do it. I can't say you can do it on your own, but people do it on their own. It may not be possible for everyone, and obviously. That's why we're around, among others. We sometimes have people come to us who've been sober for a long time, but they're fearful about recurrence, and so they come to learn new tools and new techniques. Yeah. Maybe they've been sober for 2 years or 3 years. So that capacity or that ability to overcome an addiction is inherent in humans at some level. And sometimes, as I give a lot of introductory talks, people say, well, what's the most important thing if you want to recover? I say, well, number one, motivation. Number two, motivation. Number three, guess what? Motivation. Because without that, all the tools in the world are not going to help you. You're not going to use them when push comes to shove and you're craving and so forth. So that's our number one thing. And we have developed some very powerful tools to help people in their perceptions about what's going on, their capacity to analyze the situation appropriately. If I were to summarize, as I was forced to on one occasion during a meeting when someone challenged me, I'm not sure why he was so pugnacious, but he said, what's this all about? What's this smart recovery all about? This is my third meeting I've gone to, and I don't get it. What are you guys selling? What's the crux of smart recovery? Yeah. So, as I say, I don't know why you're so belligerent, but I was on the spot and I had to come up with something. And I came up with this. We want to help people clarify their thinking so they can make better decisions for themselves. We want to help people clarify their thinking so they can make better decisions for themselves. And that's pretty much the touchstone of the whole program.
It's funny that you mentioned that it's about getting people to make a clear thought and make a decision, because when we're in our addictions, both mentally and biologically, we're not making clear decisions.
Yeah, and of course, the primary issue there is to become aware of your thinking. You may say, well, it's our thought. No, we have thousands of thoughts a day. Most of them just drift through our head. We don't think much about them. Yeah. So in reality, if you want to boil it down even more essentially, it's learning to think about your thinking in a more rational way. And I must say, even in my own circumstance, I don't happen to have any kind of substance addiction, although some people might say I'm a workaholic. I found that I became more aware of my thinking as I was running meetings, and didn't let some crazy irrational thoughts that used to just zip through get there, stop them and think about them and say, well, that's not helpful, that's nuts, or it's not helpful, or whatever. So it's a contagious thing. I remember about the sixth meeting I ever did, one man came in, and during the check-in, when we start our meeting, we have everybody check in. He said, gee, he said, this rational thinking is beginning to infiltrate my entire life, my interactions with my family, with my job, and whatever. I said, well, what's wrong with that? He said, well, I thought it was just supposed to be for addictions. What's wrong with rational thinking in every phase of your life? He said, oh, I guess you're right. So it does become infectious, and people realize that it alters their life very significantly. They're just becoming aware of the ability to become aware of your thinking and to alter it. So the second part of the program, what we call coping with urges. So scientifically, that's very well established. There are maybe, let's say, 3 essential techniques. One is simply what we call urge surfing. That is recognizing that no one ever died from an urge. It's painful, it's uncomfortable, it's irritating, but it's not fatal. and usually fades with time. And so one way to approach it is simply to mindfully acknowledge it and say, hey, too bad. I wish I didn't have it, but I do. That's it. And wait for it to gradually fade out. The second approach is what we call a behavioral approach. Maybe you do something to distract yourself. You squeeze your Hoku point between your thumb and your forefinger. You snap an elastic band on your wrist or something. So a whole variety of behavioral techniques to distract you from or antagonize the urge. And then finally, there's the cognitive techniques, which says, what were you thinking? And is it rational or irrational? Is it helpful or unhelpful? Are you telling yourself things that aren't really true, et cetera, et cetera? Are you ignoring the consequences of this thought, and so forth? So the third part of the program is really the foundational or the cornerstone part, cognitive behavioral psychology. And we use a technique that was invented by Albert Ellis called the ABCs. And I won't go through into details. It's complicated, but in essence, actually, it's very simple. Once you learn the technique, it's sort of infectious. It's a viral thing in your own brain, really, that spreads and makes you more aware of your thinking and how to analyze in an objective way your thoughts about life and about your addictive thinking, and how to modify it so that it makes you less upset, less depressed, less anxious, and thinking more rationally or helpfully about your situation. Some people who have a relapse at a meeting, they say, well, what were you thinking? It's critical now. What were you thinking before you decided to drink a drug? And a lot of people say, I wasn't thinking anything. Well, I used to say that never happens, but I think in 3,000 meetings, I think I've heard 3 bona fide situations where people were really on automatic pilot. So I don't say it never happens anymore. But many people say, I wasn't thinking anything. And then we say, well, see if you can dredge out what was going on. There are the mechanisms, suppression and repression, that lead us to forget painful thoughts, painful memories. Usually by the end of the meeting, about 80% of people put their hand up and say, well, here's what I was thinking. Now we have something to work with to help them with prevention of dealing with the next episode. Most importantly, we don't send people back to zero time. Somebody who's had, let's say, 2 years of sobriety and relapses, they don't go back to zero. Hopefully they learned something that enabled them to maintain sobriety for 2 years, or 2 months or 2 days even. So
it's still part of the same.
It's still part of it, and it's a learning experience. A relapse is part of recovery. There's almost nobody who just, quotes, recovers. Occasionally people have sort of a spiritual, truly, as they say in AA, and I've recorded 28 of these in my meetings, people who have a sudden and abrupt, what's the equivalent of a conversion experience. And they sort of lose their desire to drink a drug, and it's over.
Wow.
But I wish I knew how to reproduce that. But
and how amazing.
Right. So, and there are experiences like that in medicine as well, or in religious conversion. I call it a secular conversion experience. People could tell you exactly where they were, exactly the time of day when it happened, and they have a tremendous feeling of exhilaration with it. And they say, I'm through. That's it. Most people have to work at it.
Like you said, only 28 people that you've recorded, and you've done thousands of meetings.
And I find them because people say, I'm not having any urges. Well, that's very unusual when you recover from an addiction. And it's usually when I track it down, they can describe this experience, tell you exactly where it happened or what happened. So, and then the last part of our program, which wasn't there when we started, we call lifestyle balance. Balancing immediate gratification with enduring satisfaction. The two are incompatible once you establish an addiction. Everything is focused on immediate gratification. And often people, especially if they have an illegal drug, it's a 24/7 preoccupation. The minute you get up in the morning, the minute you go to sleep at night. And of course, if you're on cocaine, you may not go to sleep for 2 or 3 nights. So it's 72 hours of intense focus on the addiction and so forth. So people have to find other consuming and engaging activities in order to get out of it. Now, that's not everyone. If people haven't destroyed their relationships, their finances, their health, and everything else, and they just stop, they can get back to a fairly normal life without completely revamping things. Other people who have lost all their relationships, lost all their money, impacted their health, all kinds of legal problems, at that stage, they really have to rebuild a lifestyle and a life interests in a different way. Some of them do it through their recovery programs. People get deeply involved in 12-step. People get deeply involved in Smart Recovery and find it a very important and engaging life activity. They take their facilitated training and so forth and so on. That may be one of the parts of rebuilding their life. We don't tell people they have to come forever. And why? Because they don't have to. Even Bill W. acknowledges this in the big book. There's a time people can move on. I think he's talking more about 10 years than what we're talking about. I'd say the average person who does not become a facilitator and stay on, probably average dwell time in Smart Recovery is 18 months to 2 years. And then people get into a very stable situation and they move on. And we tell them to move on when they're ready. We like them to announce it so we don't wonder what happened to them. And they'll say, this is it. This is going to be my last meeting. I feel I'm in a stable situation. We invite them to come back if they wish, if they run into a tough spot. Occasionally they do, may show up 6 years later and say, I'm going through a rough spot. I need a touch up or whatever. So most people can do this capably. Very few are able to go back to social drinking. We don't advise it. We're an abstinence-oriented program and feel, it's something you can live without. I think in the U.S. there's 50 million adults that don't drink at all. They seem to have normal lives, enjoyable lives. It's not an issue for them for one reason or another. I've run into two people, one at the 16th birthday party and one at the 21st birthday party who got deathly sick, weren't used to, like their friends, loaded them up, they puked all night, and they never drank again. And one was a cousin of mine, and one was one of our facilitators who got hooked on cocaine later. But I just found out recently he never drank again after his 21st birthday. He was deathly ill all night, and I guess had an experience that made him antipathetic to it. That's all. He said, "Oh, never did," and he was in a business where people, usually drink at meetings and so on, but never did. So, so there is, but people can, of course, get hooked on something else. So that lifestyle balance is a crucial thing, and the duration of stay, as I say, is now we have one in the Boston area. We have one facilitator who's been doing it for 27 years. Wow. And many have been doing it for many years. They enjoy it. I must say it's a challenging, facilitating a meeting is a challenging and stimulating intellectual activity. And whenever I leave a meeting, even though I've done over 3,000 of them, I always am playing it over in my mind. What could I have done better? How could we have done things differently? What have I learned? I've learned something virtually every meeting. So it is part of, I think, a lifestyle balance that includes intellectual stimulation and challenge and so forth. We are training about 300 people per month. We have a very intense, well-rated online training program. About 2/3 of these people are professionals who either want to run smart recovery meetings or want to use our techniques with their own private practices. And about 1/3 are peers, what we call that, is people who've been through the program successfully and want to continue helping others and to some degree helping themselves. There's a self-help issue with being a facilitator in terms of keeping you attuned to your own thinking and the challenges of being a recovered person.
And the community of it as well.
And the community activity is very beneficial. And without it, we wouldn't have a program. So that's for the US, the UK, and Australia because of the time differentials. I'm on the board of Smart Recovery Australia. My wife and I brought Smart Recovery to Australia. She's Australian. So I'm on the board. I have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 5 a.m. in Sydney. It's usually about either 2 or 3 a.m. in Boston or Miami, where I live now. And that's it. So I have to put in 2 to 3 hours on that once a month. So that's about the story. Now, I should just mention our website because the website is huge. It's about 1.5 million unique visitors per month come to our website.
Wow. And
we have 30 online meetings per week. They're very well attended. We have to cut them off at some point, between 35 and 50, depending on the facilitator and what they think they can handle and the nature of the meeting. Most of the meetings are actual smart recovery meetings. A few are what we call tool meetings, where we go through the individual tools. We have 14 tools.
Oh, cool. So if someone wants to go deeper with something, you have a separate
right
for that. And so if someone wants to attend a smart recovery meeting, what is the process? Where do they find a meeting local to them? How do they sign up for it, or do they just show up? What's the process?
Yeah, well, my phone number or email is associated with a couple of the meetings, and a lot of people think they have to do something preliminary. They call up and I have to tell them, no preliminaries are necessary. I usually suggest they go to the website, learn a little bit about the program before they come to the meeting, but you can just walk through the door. It's anonymous, it's confidential. The place to find out if you have a meeting accessible to you is the website. You go on the website, there's a big thing, it says meetings, you click on it, and you put in your zip code or your name of your location, and then there's a little dial you can adjust, 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles,
cool, yeah.
Depending how far you would be willing to go, and you hit the button and it'll start listing the meetings in proximity to you, the closest meeting first, and then so forth and so on. So clearly we have, in the US, I think there's about 1,400 meetings. There's about 250 in Canada, so not every place. In British Columbia, they have over 100 meetings. It's been tremendously successful there, and they're working with putting it into all their prisons and so forth. Prince Edward Island has, I think, 7 or 8 meetings. Been quite a remarkable proposition there. 2 women got it started, took the training, knew nothing about it, took the training, started meetings, and I think they have 7 meetings up there now in the smallest province. So if there is no meeting, you can do an online meeting. You can buy the handbook, which is inexpensive. It's in its 3rd edition now. It's been published in 11 languages. And and Australian Aboriginal vernacular. So with special illustrations.
That's
so
incredible.
and if worst comes to worst, you can't find a meeting, you can actually start a meeting. We have two mechanisms to do that. First is what's called host training. You can host a meeting. So a host meeting is a meeting that doesn't go deeply into the tools or into cognitive behavioral psychology, but is a discussion meeting. So we train people in what's called meeting management, how to encourage people, quiet people to participate, how to close down people who try to dominate the conversation, things like that. Yep. There are techniques to do it that are not obnoxious, like shut the hell up and so forth, short of that. And then it gives you 6 or 8 discussion topics that can go around, and it's a very useful introduction to each of the discussion topics are related to a tool. Or from there, you can take the facilitator training. And clearly you have to have some level of sobriety in order to do that. But there are plenty of people out there who are in a sober state and who may want to get a meeting started to help themselves and others. They can take the facilitator training. And takes about 20 hours. Professional can probably do it in about 12 hours. They're familiar with the techniques and the ideas. And one of the ideas we get across is something called motivational interviewing. We don't tell anybody what to do. We're not confrontational, and we try to get people to literally help themselves, learn how to help themselves, rather than say, you better do this, you better do that, and so forth. Generally speaking, there's 2 reasons when I give introductory talks. I said there's 2 reasons why we don't tell people what to do. First of all, is there anyone here who's not been told they better stop or else? As a rule, nobody puts their hand up. Rarely there's someone who hasn't been told they figured it out for themselves. So, it doesn't work. If it worked, we wouldn't have to have any meetings. Everybody has been told by someone, cut it out, this is bad, it's a bad idea, you're ruining your life, you're ruining everybody's life, and so forth. The second reason is people don't like it. At least in our society, people don't like to be told what to do.
No. In fact, it'll often cause someone to want to do it more. Yeah,
they get defensive, they get oppositional, and that's just the nature of human beings as a rule. So that's it. So also it's scientifically proven to be much more effective than a confrontational approach. I should mention at this point that we do have meetings which are called family and friends for people who are involved with those who have an addiction. And those meetings, we have about 60 now. And 3 online meetings a week of family and friends.
Excellent.
2 roles. First is support. People, it's very, very difficult to be a loved one or a partner or a relative of someone who has an addiction. It is a terrible, terrible role because you don't have any direct control of the situation, but you are punished by it, and you witness them punishing themselves. So the support factor is a very important factor. The second element is something called CRAFT, very well proven scientific approach, community reinforcement and family training. And it emphasizes the fact that the best approach, scientifically proven approach, to helping someone with an addiction is what we call positive reinforcement, not negative reinforcement, not screaming, yelling, threatening, and so forth, and deprivation, but encouragement and reward, positive reward when they're not drinking or drugging, and so forth. So it's a tough thing for people to learn and do, but the meetings help them in that regard.
That's excellent. And I had a conversation with Eric Kerr on his interview about this, and he was talking a lot about it from that family perspective because of the collateral damage when someone's addicted,
Right.
and how important it is to not be that trying to shame or guilt or confront, but more support, be there, listen, offer help, but know that, you know, that's what you can do. Telling someone they have to change because how much they're hurting you will just push them away even further.
Yeah, that is a very difficult role to play, but people can learn, and apparently they do. We have a meeting. We hit on this by chance. We have a family and friends meeting and a regular Smart Recovery meeting in the same facility at the same time on a Saturday afternoon at 4:30 in two different rooms. And that was done for convenience of our facilitators who, you know, it helped the coverage because we had 3 or 4 facilitators who were cross-trained and they could cover the different meetings and so forth. But what turned out was that about half the people in each meeting had a loved one in the other meeting.
Wow.
They often came together and left together. And that seemed to really reinforce what they were doing. Now we had one of our facilitators from Connecticut came up to a couple came up to Boston and attended. One attended the SMART meeting, one attended the family and friends meeting. They went back to Connecticut and said, gee, this is a terrific idea. And a foundation decided to make a grant and start 8 dual meetings in Connecticut at 8 different facilities. One is a college, the other 7 are treatment facilities. And there'll be a youth and teen meeting.
That's exciting.
At the facility at the same time as a family and friends meeting for parents and loved ones and so forth. So we'll see how that works out now. They're just starting up. I think there's 4 of them now running, and the other 4 people are training still. And we do have a separate training module for family and friends now. We didn't have that for a while. Interestingly, the family and friends a handbook for participants was written in Australia, and the facilitator manual for family and friends written in the UK. So it's truly now an international operation, and with cross-fertilization is going on from country to country and so forth.
And I love that it's spreading the focus to help friends and family, youth and teens, the person suffering, because I think we've seen enough proof that when people are isolated trying to get help on their own, and then they go back into the exact same environment that they were in before, the chances for success are so low.
Right. And that reminds me of one more thing. We've always had a policy, SMART that is, of acceptance of appropriately prescribed medications, either for treatment of the primary addiction. I think the FDA has 4 authorized drugs for addictions, or for the underlying psychiatric disorders, which are very common. I mean, one of the ways that people with psychiatric disorders cope with their problems and with their emotional distress is drugs. Some prescribed and some not prescribed. And of course, the almost universally available drug of alcohol. It's not universal. I mean, I remember my wife and I were walking through a huge square in Morocco. And all the buses came in there and dropped their passengers, picked up the baggage, turned around, went out, completely surrounded by cafes. Now, only men at the cafes, naturally, but they're all drinking mint tea. You know, they're smoking hookahs and drinking mint tea. So no alcohol. I think alcohol was available in the tourist hotels, but that's it. Just not part of the milieu for people, so they drink mint tea. I don't think it's going to become too popular in the U.S. I suppose Starbucks is a substitute. So we're comfortable with that. It's part of the current mode, and it's becoming much more popular because of studies that show that starting prisoners who are going to be released, inmates are going to be released on these substitute drugs like Suboxone and Vivitrol, cuts the death rate dramatically. So that's an easy thing to demonstrate. Relapse right after they get out of prison is a tremendous hazard. And because they haven't been taking the drugs, the overdoses are frequent because they're not at a tolerance level. They go back to the old dose they were taking, and it kills them. So that's becoming almost universal now as a preventive measure. Incidentally, the 12-step, the AA anyway, has the same policy now, I think for about 8 years. But as you can imagine, there are many people in the groups who are from the old style where they used to say you're eating your addiction or something like that. People on methadone or Suboxone, I suppose that'll decrease with time. And incidentally, we don't have any objection to 12-step programs. We have only objection to coercion into it without offering any alternatives. There are now a number of alternatives available, like SMART, Life Ring, Women for Sobriety, SOS, and they should be offered. In the US, it's a constitutional issue. Other countries may have different rules, but from a clinical perspective, that is what works for an individual. From an ethical perspective, a medical ethical perspective, of which the two major concerns are what we call beneficence, doing what's best for the patient or the client, and autonomy, that is recognizing the importance of choice for the individual in treatment. This is absolutely recognized, say, in the treatment for cancer. You choose. Do you want radiation? Do you want surgery? Do you want chemotherapy? Things like that. No one would dream about saying you have to have this treatment if there's alternatives, reasonable alternatives available. And that ought to be applied here too. Now, in surveys that we do periodically, national and also in Massachusetts, where I got most of my experience with SMART, we ask people, do you ever go to 12-step meetings? About 30% of people who consider SMART recovery their primary recovery modality and come regularly also go occasionally to 12-step meetings. We don't have any problem with this. If you go to a meeting and you come out feeling better than you went in, fine. You had a good experience, whatever. Yep. Of course, we get many people who are fleeing 12 steps, don't want anything to do with it. But obviously, 30% is a very significant number. They don't have any temperamental necessarily or intellectual or worldview objection to the 12 steps. Just didn't work for them.
And I love the point you're making too, because it's the purpose behind this website here, and Sobriety Starts Here, is to give people those options. Because so often when someone wants to get sober or starts the journey, they're told there's one option for them, one solution. And usually that's either something like AA, because that's the one everyone knows, or it's whatever option that their friends or family know of. And they just
Or it's what we have here. That's what you need.
Yeah, exactly.
What we have at these rehabilitation, when we had a exhibit table at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. So one of the mostly there were people on staffs of drug courts and so forth. They once said, well, we refer people to this certain treatment program, and they have never said that the person needs anything except to go to the treatment program. And of course, this is ludicrous. and would be totally unacceptable from a medical ethical perspective.
Yeah.
There has to be someone who doesn't need their program, but would do better in some other program. But that's it. That's the nature of the problem. I mean, one of the issues is, sometimes people say, well, the AMA says that it's a disease.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, we're agnostic on that issue. We say, hey, doesn't make any difference whether you think it's a disease or you don't think it's a disease. You better stop drinking.
Yep, that's true.
But so we've decided that, arguments about this in the meetings are not productive. Yeah. It's okay for, people to argue about it and at their dinner table or wherever they want to, for professionals to discuss it in a rational way, hopefully. But it doesn't further people's recovery and in our experience. So we say we don't discuss it. It's not relevant to the issue of how someone has decided to get over their problem. So the AMA says it's a disease. Very simple. If it's a disease, we get paid for it. There's a code in the charge manual, and we can get paid for taking care of people with addictions. The Veterans Association, the Veterans Administration in America, has a different view. They say it's a willful misbehavior, so they don't have to pay pensions. Okay, so I mean, clearly the motivation is economic rather than scientific, and it makes no sense. So what ends up is most of the people who have an addiction in the VA system, eventually a physician doesn't want to treat them for nothing, so he or she says they're depressed, which most of them are, I guess. If you have a bad addiction to alcohol or opiates, the depression is almost inevitably part of it. So they certify them as depressed, and they get the pension.
Yeah, and again, it's so frustrating to me when I hear that talking, because so many people, I see that conversation, people arguing about, is it a disease? Is it not a disease? Is it choice? And it's like, to see that a lot of that conversation is being driven for economic reasons. Do companies want to pay benefits? Do they have to pay disabilities for it? Do they have to cover certain treatments? And so much of that conversation is being driven economically. And I love the stand that you're taking is, forget all that. You still need to deal with these certain things. You still need to build these certain tools to be able to deal with it in your life and move forward. So let's come meet you where you're at, and let's start dealing with those things.
Right. It's sort of a wheel spinning proposition. There's a third way in between, which is to call it a disorder, which recognizes the fact that it is a serious, significant condition with a lot of pathological implications and so forth. But I mean, some people get up one morning and they say, that's it, I'm through. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of people who've done that. And I don't know of any disease. I practiced medicine for 30 years, and I don't know of any disease you can get up in the morning and say, that's it, I'm through with it. And you are, and you never have it again for the rest of your life. You got all kinds of mishmash in your brain, everything else, but the problem dissipates. So I personally prefer the term disorder, and many other people do. But as I say, it's not germane to your recovery. Now, for some people, it's comfortable. They like to think it because there's a tremendous guilt if they feel that this was a voluntary thing in some way that they got themselves into. And by designating it as a disease, they say, well, I'm not responsible. And this was genetic or some other thing like that. And that's fine with me if that's what they want to think. It's helpful to them to consider that element and so forth. Fine. Personally, and that's what Smart Recovery's point of view is it in. You want to have a disease, have the disease. Or if you don't want to have a disease, don't have the disease. And focus on recovering one way or the other. You better change the way you think, because if you don't change the way you think, you are not going to change the way you feel. and you are not going to change the way you behave. That's
Well,
it.
I love the philosophy. And again, I love that it's inclusive, you're welcoming people. And again, it's don't sweat the semantics and don't sweat the small stuff. It's let's meet you where you are. Let's get you help. Let's start fixing your life. And it's funny that you were mentioning earlier, the person talking about it coming into all areas of their lives, because really everything you're talking about are great skills to overcome any obstacles in your life, let alone addiction, but something you can keep using through as you're moving through and as you're coming up with things. So if someone wants to check out a meeting near them, is the website smartrecovery.com?
.org.
.org.
It's also .com. We had someone parasitically use smartrecovery.com, but eventually we managed to battle them off. So if people put in .com by mistake, they'll go to .org.
Perfect.
But the official website, because it is a nonprofit organization, is Smart Recovery, no punctuation, smartrecovery.org. Or as we say in Massachusetts, smartrecovery.org. We don't pronounce ours. We don't believe in ours in Massachusetts.
Well, I love it. And so if you don't mind taking a few minutes, Joe, do you mind telling us, how did you get started with this in the first place? What led you down this path?
Right. So several tracks, actually. The first was as a physician, and I had a side specialty of pain management that I initiated myself at a time when there was no such thing, really. I was an internist, primary care internist, and an academic internist, and got into pain. So, over time, I picked up some people who had addiction problems. I intensively referred them to AA or NA, encouraged them. When they came back, said they didn't like it or they didn't want it or it didn't work for them, I bastinadoed them to go back again and said, this is the only thing that works. That's what I was taught.
Yep.
That's what I knew. But some of them just refused or didn't go anywhere. And so I had these people orbiting around and I didn't know what to do with them. One of them, he wouldn't go. He was a devout Catholic, but he said, I confessed to my priest. I'm not going to confess to strangers, this kind of thing. And I made him go back, and he went back, and he said, it's not for me. I said, well, what is it now? He said, I don't go for that touchy-feely stuff. Well, anyway, he was incorrigible. He just wouldn't go back. I didn't know what to do with him. I called a friend who was a family therapist, and he said, well, I don't know. I said, send him to a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists in those days didn't want anything to do with people with addictions. They're notoriously difficult to treat. There was maybe 2 addictionologists in the city of Boston, a medical mecca. Like if you wanted an appointment with them, you'd have to wait 2 months. Wow. So I said, what the heck do I do? I said, I tried to get him to go to a psychiatrist. He said, I'm not crazy. I'm not going to a psychiatrist. So I gave him you don't have to be crazy to go to a psychiatrist talk. Didn't make any impression on him. And the family therapist said, well, send him to a DUI meeting. I said, DUI? He didn't have any DUI. He said, well, that's the only thing left. So it didn't make any sense to me, but I referred him. And always when I sent him, I said, come back the next day. I want to see you. So he came back the next day with a notebook. And I said, how was that meeting? He said, well, that was terrific.
Wow.
I said, what was terrific about it? He said, just the facts. That's all I want. They told you about how it affects your liver, how it affects your brain. And that was it. The guy never took a drink again. His wife dropped the divorce suit and whatever. It was unbelievable. And I followed that guy for 17 years because he had hypertension and diabetes. As far as I know, never took another drink. And so, that made an impression on my brain. But at that time, I never heard about SMART. Maybe 5 years later, I heard a talk by Jack Trimpe about his program, which was called Rational Recovery. And I said, okay, I'm going to get this started in Boston. And I got a little grant to invite Jack to Boston. He gave a talk at Harvard and this and that. Anyway, we only came out of it with one little group that was struggling. And eventually, they were fighting with the facilitator, who was a social work student. And they said, well, we want you to come and run the meeting. It'd been a year since I heard Jack's talk, and I read his book, and I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. I went back and I sweated my way through the meeting, but these people, had some idea what was going on. And then I said, well, that's it. The whole thing is kaput. I put in a lot of time and effort and energy into it, and the whole thing looked like it was blowing up. Incidentally, the meeting at that time was in the basement of Memorial Hall at Harvard, which is now a pub. And so I was drenched with sweat, and I was leaving the meeting. They said, well, you're coming next week, aren't you? And I said, well, I hadn't planned on it. I'm busy as hell. I'm a physician. And they said, well, we want you to come next week. So I read the book, and I started writing. Within 4 or 5 weeks, I began to get the feel for it. And then somebody called me and said, I have a room in the Westboro Library. I want to start a meeting. And I said, oh my God, that's 40 miles from Boston. I haven't got time to do that. But anyway, I broke down. I went, started that meeting. 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I got a call from somebody who said, I have a room in the basement of the Falmouth Synagogue. Can we start a meeting there? Well, that's it. That's Massachusetts, and I was at 31,000 smart recovery meetings. We're in all the major hospitals, rehabs, whatever. We have 36 meetings in 24 hospitals, and spread it all over the world. My wife and I spread it to the UK. There's 530 meetings there every week. Australia has over 200. And that's it. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Our last meeting startup is in Swakopmund, Namibia, which will give you an idea how far things have gone. And they have a meeting in the community and in the Swakopmund prison. So that's how things have gone. And now it's endorsed by just about everybody who does endorsements. National Institute of Drug Abuse, National Institute of Alcohol and Alcohol Abuse, the NICE Commission in England, in the UK, and a similar commission in Australia. And it was recommended thrice in the recent Surgeon General's report on the addiction crisis in the US. So now the problem is keeping up with the demand rather than stimulating demand. And, as a nonprofit, operates on a skeletonized budget. We're having trouble now keeping up with it, especially in the online area, which is accessible to anybody anywhere in the world. So hopefully we will meet the challenge, however, and continue putting on. We're putting on now about 100 meetings every 3 months, starting 100 meetings every 3 months.
Wow. And so is that more facilitators that you're going to need to meet that demand?
No, because the demand that we're mainly interested in is community meetings, and most of the professionals who are taking the training are doing closed meetings, in their facility. Few of them open them to the public. And a lot of the people who take the facilitated training are maybe to cover meetings where a facilitator is leaving or something like that. And starting a meeting isn't easy. You have to find a place, hopefully for free. A lot of places want to charge for them, which is a very difficult thing to do when you're starting up the meeting. Maybe after 3 months, you can get enough from the hat to pay the rent, but that first 3 months is rough and so forth. So we're trying to support people as much as possible, but still getting meeting going requires a lot of, let's say, chutzpah and tenacity. And some people have that skill set, and some people may be great facilitators, but they don't have the public relations kind of techniques down. We try to help them and give them hints and give them support. We have regional coordinators. In a place like British Columbia, there's been support by the government that emphasize the importance of evidence-based techniques. Mm. And so they want treatment centers and other places. They say, what is your approach? And if they say 12-step, they say you have to have also an evidence-based approach, like smart recovery. So people pick this up in the recovery centers, and when they go out, if there's no meeting in their area, they start it. So every little town in British Columbia has a smart recovery meeting, and now it's going to be put into all the prisons. So that's just sort of a unique phenomenon. Also, Australia is very much supportive of the idea of evidence-based programs, and they have 250 meetings. They only have like 24 million people, so they have relative to the U.S. they have 3 or 4 times as many meetings as we have. Same with the UK, with its national health. So meetings get started in treatment facilities, and then they put a peer in charge of the meeting. So there's in the U.S. where there's no national health program, as there is in Canada, it's somewhat difficult to get things going.
Well, it's definitely promising to hear that some governments are picking it up and supporting it. And obviously in the States, it is harder for something like that to pick up, but it might entice even just a state to start with it and get the ball rolling, because it is, I think we're becoming more and more aware as a society in general of the problem of addiction in so many areas, in not just alcohol and drugs, but also with social media and these days with younger folks, and online shopping and gambling, things like that. So I think as that conversation continues and people are realizing more and more that this isn't just the poor person on the street problem, addiction affects people at all levels of our society. Hopefully we see things like this gain more support, both on the ground level, but also on a government level as well.
Yeah, well, we see more direct referrals by professionals now who are becoming, especially in Massachusetts, where we have very high penetration, although many people still don't know about it or haven't heard about it. But professionals are getting more aware that they talk to people, see what their interests, what their worldview is, and then recommend. What I did while I was still in practice was I said, go to a 12-step meeting and go to a smart recovery meeting, and then figure out which one is more likely to be helpful to you in your particular temperament and worldview. Or you may be comfortable with going to both, which is fine. And this is an ancient kind of concept, because the Greeks knew about this. They talked about Platonic attitudes and Aristotelian attitudes, and that the world was this a dichotomy of human worldviews. The Platonic is more of an external locus of control kind of concept, and the Aristotelian approach is a more internal locus of control or empiric kind of concept. And then there's people in the middle who aren't that, oriented to either one in particular, sort of a bit of both. So in general, people with a more Aristotelian outlook will be more attracted to a smart recovery kind of approach, and people with a more Platonic worldview outlook would be more attracted to 12 steps. And never the twain shall meet is not true, because we see that there's a lot of people who can go either way.
Yeah. Well, and some people like to take that control within themselves, but also like to have that feeling that there is a greater purpose outside of themselves, and things that are just kind of preordained or destined or whatever it is. And so they can find a blend. And I'm a huge fan of that as well, in having the choice, because some people are connected to one thing, some people are connected to another. Try it, see what resonates with you. Right. As long as it connects with you, it doesn't matter if one's right over the other. That doesn't really, like you were even mentioning there, it's what works for you is the one that's right for you.
And of course, it's very difficult to study this, because because people are oriented often to one or the other. So even randomizing them, you might find out, well, they're both equally effective. The problem is they're not equally effective for many of the people in each who's randomized to each group. So in truth, if you can isolate those people who are more likely to benefit from a 12-step program, and those people are more likely to benefit from a more empirical program, that would be the ideal. And that's what you can achieve by having people attend both and see which one makes more sense to them.
I love it. Well, it's thank you so much for introducing us to the whole SMART recovery method. And if you're watching this and you're wondering if you're curious about it or you're interested in checking it out, I mean, even check out an online meeting to just get an idea for what it's like. Go to smartrecovery.org, get an idea what it's like. And Joe, I just want to really thank you for your time today in talking to me and really sharing with us what this is about, because I think people have heard about it on the periphery, but I think a lot of people have been wondering what it's like, what the experience is like. And I think you've done a great job in sharing that with us. Okay,
thanks very much. And I might say, if you do want to attend online meetings, get there early, because they're very much in demand. And if you don't get in, go to the chat room and complain.
Get more meetings set up.
Right.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks very much. Good luck.
To get access to all of the free videos and interviews, visit sobrietystartshere.com.